I have some friends here tonight, so I hope I don't completely bore them. They've seen a lot of this before, so I wish I could reinvent myself every day so I could be fresh to even my friends, but I hope you'll just bear with me. I want to start by showing a couple projects by two different artists. On the right is Andy Goldsworthy, and on the left is a German artist named Voth. Now, I don't know much about Voth. Everything that I've seen is the few books is written in German, but I don't think you really need to read about either one of them to kind of understand the work. And for me, when you look at the work, it's initially big, it's bold. Is it okay?
Yeah, I'm just going to adjust the sound.
Okay, too loud. There we go. Okay, that's, yeah. It's compelling. You know, it's about form. But when you look further into the work, you begin to see something much deeper than the visual. In the case of Goldsworthy, you see that the snowball is out of context, and in Voth, he's starting to make a construction. You see a journey starting to unfold. And as you look deeper, the work becomes richer. And both artists go to great lengths to actually photograph the process of how they make or deconstruct things. And so what you originally thought you saw is transforming into something completely different. Goldsworthy's snowball into a pile of rocks, and Voth taking this sarcophagus on a journey through space. And in the end, for both artists, the object is really unimportant. It's the experience that really matters. And so for us, what we try to do with our work is to think more about the experience of the work as opposed to what you see. We hope that when one leaves our work, that they remember being there, but not necessarily what it looks like. So for us, we're always thinking about the journey or the experience of making things. And it started for me in the late 1990s with this project for a film director. And we were at the time doing bathroom remodels and very small projects, and I was determined to try to do something more. Well, we wound up getting this job because we were the only firm that would take this under financial penalty to get them in 15 weeks from when we started the project to when they moved in. And so I talked to a friend of mine who was a builder, and we partnered on this. So we kind of collaborated to do this and went in under penalty, financial penalty, to get this person in. So I was at that time interested in this container, and I wasn't so much interested in the container itself. I used to carry that little ad on the left in my pocket, and every time I got a new client, I would pull it out and try and peddle it on them. But I was interested in more in what the story embodied in the container. And I thought, you know, about what Venturi said in his book, Complexity and Contradiction, when he said, a familiar thing seen in an unfamiliar way becomes both perceptually old and new at the same time. And so it had a story that was already built into it, the transfer of goods from east and west, our trade imbalance. And so we went down to Long Beach, picked one out, and we started construction. So what I'm showing you here are design drawings, our construction drawings, and our client presentation drawings. They were all done on 11 by 17 vellum freehand. And we literally faxed them to the job site, and the next day it was built. And so we didn't get a chance to overthink what we were doing, but you know, we worked closely with the builder. We were the building for us became a drawing at full scale. And so the finishes on the steel, we developed the mechanisms for the doors. And, you know, we did this thing within 15 weeks, basically one of your semesters, we designed and built it within their budget. And so when I finished that project, I started to think a little bit more about how, you know, we practice architecture. And, you know, we tend to draw things, complete them, get bids, permits. It's a very, very long process. And I remember my days of working with Paul Rudolph in New York, and some of my colleagues dragged me up to this place in upstate New York, and it's called Opus 40. It was built by the man on the right there, Harvey Feit, who was a sculptor. And it's called Opus 40 because Harvey Feit worked on this for 40 years until he died in an accident while working on it. But the only sculpture he really built was the one you see right there in the middle. And he bought this place in upstate New York. It was an abandoned bluestone quarry with the idea that he would have unlimited stone to make his sculptures. But what he made instead was this fantastic place. And it kind of evolved daily. And over time, it kind of grew naturally by really putting his hands in the work. And so I started to look, you know, at how other sculptors work, guys like Henry Moore, and what their drawings meant, and how they worked. And what I surmised is that sculptors don't make drawings of their work, they make drawings about their work or about their intentions and what they intend to do. They're kind of a framework for them actually to build their work. And so I thought to myself, you know, is there another way that, you know, I could practice architecture that was more like a sculptor than a technician or the traditional way of doing architecture. So what I usually do when I have these ideas is I take them to students like you guys and I test them out. This one I did at Woodbury University. And so I had a client, Venice Community Housing Corporation, a nonprofit who has a program that they call the Handy Worker Program, and they teach inner city kids that have no high school diploma, no driver's license, drug problems, on and on and on. They help them not only get their life together, but teach them a pre-construction skill. And so they've bounced all over town wherever they could get free rent. And I found a trailer that I could get for free, and I talked to the executive director and said, why don't we put your program on wheels? So we did a summer studio to build this project. This is a project we did in 8 weeks from start to finish with a half dozen students and $3,000. No drawings. We started the first week, everyone individually made their own models or their ideas, and you know, we had a lot of grand schemes that were happening, double-decker trailers, which we didn't even have. But after 1 week, we sat with the students and decided what were the important ideas that we wanted to achieve, and we threw everything out and we started building. One of the things which was important to the group was that this thing could go to a job site, it could also open up, and so the side was removed. We also worked with the students from Venice Community Housing, so it was a real interesting mix of kids who grew up with big problems and then other kids who were actually in college. And so it sort of brought the Venice community students up and humbled the college students a lot more. So it was a great learning experience for all. But in the end, we built this project that no drawings, really quick, really inexpensive, that I thought was as beautiful as any architect could do. So at that point I decided that, I would try to change the way that I practice. And we made a new hire of a person that is for us a kind of in-house researcher, I would say, but we take on projects that are of interest to us, whether they have any architectural meaning or not. We just follow ideas, and some come to fruitions, others die out. But for us, they're ideas that we follow. And this was one where I was interested in the idea of wood. And wood, to me, always had this perception of a very split perception of either something that was very organic, like a tree, or something that was very inert, like a building stud or a beam. And I was looking to kind of capture that in-between moment where it's both organic and inert at the same time. And so, we just started making these models, trying to broadcast light through it. We built little maquettes, we made computer models, not really knowing what we were doing. And then I started, looking at things with the CNC machine, trying to bring the wood to life and making computer models of that as well. In the throes of this, I was made aware of a sculpture competition that was being held, and I made this drawing and entered the competition and won. So I started building what is essentially a park bench by exploring those same techniques, and this I called liquid wood. So it's made from a series of microlam beams that were computer routed and then hand tooled and put in as a park bench. And people told me that will never work as a bench. You can't sit on it or anything like that. And so I've over time gone and seen how it's done. And you get kids. I mean, it's people find a way to sit on it even more than a regular bench. And the city of Santa Monica has told me that this has been one of their most successful pieces. And I'm proud of the fact that people actually use it, they touch it, they want to engage themselves with it. And then I had a client come along to remodel a Frank Gehry building into an edit studio, and kept going with that same idea. And we wound up making a very long wall within the space by CNC routing glulam beams. And what I was starting to find with our work too, when we would propose these ideas, contractors would look at them and get scared of them, and they would just give us a price that was like through the roof. They'd go, take that, that job we last did that was very expensive, triple it and give them the price for that. So we started to just go directly to vendors or people who make things. And like this guy was a cabinet shop. He had a, massive CNC machines, and he was cutting drawer boxes with them. So we talked to him about this idea, and he was so, unlike contractors who get scared, he was really excited to do something different. And so we worked out all the details with him. It was all laid out in his shop, pieces were numbered, and we just treated the contractor like an installer. All he had to do was kind of follow the numbers of the piece of wood to kind of hang it up, and that's it in the end. And this has doors built into this wall. You can kind of see the little crack in there. And our client loves it because he tells his clients, go to Edit Studio 2, and he points at the wall, and they look a bit puzzled, and they actually sort of feel their way into it when the door pops open. And you can see a detail of that. So as we were under construction with that same project, I was heading to the Starbucks by my house at like 5 in the morning, and they were painting this bus shelter. And I quickly ran home and got my camera to take some pictures. I was just amazing, the light quality coming through, you know, the color of that thing. So when I got to the office later that morning, we had a new job. So I began to look at like how light would broadcast through different kinds of materials, and you know, we looked at marbles, recycled glass. I mean, we have closets full of this stuff. But where I got really enamored was with these drawings on the bottom. And I don't know if you've ever been to the hardware store and you see these little cheap 1/8 inch acrylics that come in like 1 million colors, and there's not one nice color in the whole thing. So we started to just lay them up to try and make new colors. And then we got into kind of the pattern making and how the light broadcasts through the pattern, which eventually wound up in that same space. And so it's 8 layers of 1/8 inch material backlit with skylights. And so you get this kind of glow of color into the space, and you get this really, you know, in 1 inch incredible depth by such a small or such thinness. And as we were working on that, another client came into the office, and he saw like a lot of these models and maquettes laying around, and he picked up this maquette steel that was about this big, and he started asking about it, and I started telling him what we were doing, and he said, "Can you do something like that in our space?" And I said, I suppose we can. And this was a prop placement company, and they needed a dressing room. So I said, you know, how about we make a dressing room for you? So we blew it up to about 17 feet tall. We started building it, and I got to that point, bringing it to the site, and they're about to move in, and my client started asking me, you know, well, what are we going to cover that thing with? And I told them I had it all under control, and I had no idea what I was doing. So I thought, what could I do? And was coming up blank. And the calls came with more frequency and with progressively more anger. And I was about to fess up to him that I had no idea what to do. And I was driving home one night thinking about it, and right at the end of my street is a auto mechanic where I would bring my old Volvo to have fixed. And for the first time ever, I noticed a sign on his building, and it said, "Will shrink wrap anything." You know, so I pulled in, you know, and I said, you know, I knew the guy fixed my car. I said, "William, you do shrink wrap?" And he started laying it on me. "I shrink wrap boats for the military, blah, blah, blah," you know. So I went back to my office, got that little maquette, and I brought it over to him and asked if he could shrink wrap it. So, you know, a couple days later, I went back, and all of a sudden, he was a lot more humbled. It didn't quite work out. So I met with him and found out what his issues were, and convinced him that he could do it. We made some modifications to this, and away he went. So we made it kind of like a pig on a spit, and he worked in the space, and there it is in its final form. And you know what we try to do a little bit too, and it's very tough in our profession, I call it calculated risk taking, where we're not, you know, like wild people just throwing caution to the wind, but we work with other expert people to try and find ways that you know, don't necessarily think about. And you can't draw that. You can't predict how the material is going to wrap on the frame, how it's going to pull away from the frame. So we find that there's some beauty in kind of the magic of the unknown as well. And so how you kind of control that unknown, I think, is what can be beautiful. So we've looked to a variety of people to resource technologies or ideas about how to do things. This was another guy that computer bends steel and rebar. We made some boardrooms all out of computer bent rebar and tube steel. And what this also allowed us to do was to take these moments or pieces, fabricate them off-site in almost a second construction site, and with someone who found these things interesting to do and cost efficient. So we would often be building 2 job sites at one, and then they would come together. But I was also very interested in the idea of stucco, or we think it's sort of the most ugly material, and I was determined to find something beautiful about it. So what we wound up doing was these boardrooms were stuccoed from the inside, and the plaster or stucco was allowed to ooze through the lath and stay there. Now, it's not something new. This is what you know is inside of a wall, but we just exposed it. It's a bit like psychoanalysis. It's there, and all we did is reveal it. And so we do that a lot with materials, is not try to invent something, but tell the story that's already there. And so you get this, contrast of the rough and the smooth. And people like to, I'm finding that they like to actually touch our buildings. And it's interesting to see that they actually want to come up and touch our buildings. So I, found in doing this, working with craftspeople and dealing with what materials kind of that are really right in front of your face, that there's very little difference between the peculiar and the beautiful, between fine art and popular culture. And I'm kind of interested in that moment where the two commingle. I'm interested in being both the teacher and the student, and trying to find something extraordinary within the ordinary. And so I want to show you a few things which we've done in that respect. This is a project in Hollywood. It's about a 40,000 square foot office, and a lot of small offices in here. And I did something which I don't like to do, is line the perimeter with offices. This, what you're seeing, is the southern portion of the building. And when I went out to this job site, it was one of my first sort of corporate clients, and I was very excited about it, but at the same time a little scared. And my client started asking me questions about what my thoughts were about his space, what I was going to do, and I didn't want to tell him. I was afraid I might scare him away on the first meeting, but somehow he got it out of me, and I said, well, I'm thinking Dixie cups. And he laughed at me. He said, you are not doing Dixie cups in my space. So I went back to the office, and we made that little mockette on the left, and I emailed him a picture, and the email comes back with the big wow and capital letters and exclamation points, and it's like, what is it? And I emailed back, Dixie cups, and he said, well, I'm going to have to talk to my people. So we wound up, it's a wall full of Dixie cups. The wall acts as a solar eclipser, and the light comes through the Dixie cups, and it's CNC routed, so they snap in and out very easily. I've been by here many times just to see how things are holding up, and I'll go by here, and one day all those Dixie cups are all white. Another time they're all yellow. I mean, the guy who didn't want Dixie cups is now playing with our building. So I find it interesting, that when people want to kind of engage themselves with our work, and it's something we generally don't think about, in architecture. We've done stuff with ping pong balls. And, you know, the interesting part about this is like when you call up a ping pong ball manufacturer and you say you want to order 20,000 ping pong balls, you know, they get very nervous. Like, why are they calling for that? You know, they're architects. They think they're industrial espionage, you know. So we've had people actually come to our studio to see what we're doing. And they wind up actually, in the end, helping us and telling us how they can retool their equipment to make things. And so they really become collaborators and make our work better. But in this case, it was really to solve a problem. We had done a lot of edit studios, and almost all the edit studios we had ever seen were black boxes. And editors don't like light in their studio. And why I found out they don't like the light is because of glare on their monitor. And any glare is kind of like a pin in their eye. And so what we found with the ping pong balls is they actually let enough light through the balls and through the gaps that it produced uniform light on their monitors that was simply a bit grainy or a bit pixelated. So we wound up having these edit studios which had natural light for the first time, but you know, when people see it, they would be taken by the sort of light quality and the texture. But once they realized what it was as they got closer, that actually heightened their experience. And so it made it much better for them. It was something familiar, something that they knew. We also recently finished this affordable housing project where we worked with a local recycle plant to make some of the building out of recycled can blocks. And, you know, I'll go out on a limb and say this is probably the only affordable housing project on the planet that's made out of Schlitz malt liquor beer cans. You know, there's some poetic, beautiful about that. But the contractors told me that architects have stopped by here asking where they could buy the blocks. You know, so it's like what we try to do is like look right in front of our face and you know, not in catalogs. As we were so busy, I seemed to have forgotten my roots. And this is a project I did in graduate school. It was a tree house, and this goes back to the early 1980s. And you know, I had no idea the term sustainability existed. And frankly, I probably wasn't very interested in it. I was interested in that image on the left. I was interested in kind of the beauty or the poetry of like living with nature. You know, it had all the things like windmill, screen porches, energy generation, all these things, but it was really more about the poetry and not about the machinery. So we started to look for projects where we could do things which were more environmentally responsible building. And we had some successes. This was a tiny little project that we wrote a grant for that we built in the city of Santa Monica. It's the only electric vehicle charging station in the country. It's now been dismantled and sits in the city yard. Olympic Boulevard goes through here. And we did other small things, but it wasn't until this project where we began to have, you know, some greater impact. And this is a affordable housing project in downtown Santa Monica. This was our first housing project, and we took this over from another architect who had a plan approved by city council, and we had to work with that party, which is what you see on the left. And the city passed this with the idea that it would be a green building, but there was no standard for it. This was in the early days of Santa Monica. So when we got to this point, our client asked, you know, well, what are we going to tell the city about what's green about it? And I said, well, nothing's green about it. And I pointed out the orientation's all wrong, it's double-loaded corridor, windows are all in the wrong place, on and on and on. And after I explained that to our client, she asked if we would make a sketch of what we think it should be, which is what we produced on the right. And it simply turned the building 90 degrees into the prevailing breezes, changed the whole orientation to induce airflow through the building. And it was passively sustainable before we did anything else. Well, we got under construction with this, and I think it was around 2002, and we had a brownout in California. And, you know, all of a sudden word had spread that there were these kind of crazy people doing this building in Santa Monica. So the media descended upon us, and I wanted to just show you some of the shenanigans that happened at that time.
Shortage.
A new building that is energy conscious is now going up in Santa Monica, and it's getting a lot of attention. Channel 4's Patrick Healy is there and has got an inside look for us tonight. Patrick?
Chuck Kelly,
It's LA, they make it look like a murder scene.
Apartment units, apart from environmental green
standards, the safety standards is the same. It's the same.
One of Leo's personal passions is finding out ways to provide environmentally safe housing to low-income families. Take a look.
We're standing here at the first green affordable housing project in the country. This is Larry Scarpa, the architect.
You get the picture. You know, but we didn't think we were really doing anything special. It was just kind of common sense to us. And, you know, it felt just odd that we were receiving praise for something that just seemed natural to do. And it, you know, if you look at these pictures, this is the south-facing facades coming off the 10 freeway, and we made it kind of a sculptural brise soleil that protected the south. And as you move around to the west, the solar panels, you know, become integrated into the building, part of the building, and also protecting that from the harshest sun that comes around. Now, this isn't dead west, but, you know, people would say to us, but, you know, isn't putting panels vertical inefficient? Well, you know, yeah, it's less efficient, you know, but they're not like on the south side. Isn't that less efficient? Yeah, you know, that's less efficient. But, you know, I tell them I would argue that a building which is an energy hog that everyone loves is more sustainable than a zero energy building that nobody likes. And, you know, I think we make buildings for people, not to be efficient. And so we'll often sacrifice some efficiency to make our buildings better. That's not the number one thing in the pecking order for us. But, you know, in doing this, we were able to add some richness to a building type that, you know, suffers from a lack of depth. And so, you know, it was rationalized that we could do the skin because it generated energy. And you could see the north, the windows are pushed all the way to the facade. The south is protected with overhangs and shaded, and the west has the panels which deflect the major part of the heat from the building. When we finished this project, Angie and I and the developer from Community Corporation, Joan Ling, got together and said, you know, we should do something more. And so we summoned a collective group of our friends to start meeting at our office. We met the first Saturday of every month, and we met for the better part of 2 years, testing ideas about how we can make sustainable, affordable, good communities, well-designed communities. And we did things down there. You can see Roger or Eric Kahn. We did some studios together. We sent out some guidelines or ideas that we had, and had 20 architects from around the country test our ideas. And after doing this for that long, we decided that we should try to do something a bit more meaningful. So we wrote some grants, and overnight we got about $1 million in grant money. And our group quickly scrambled to become this nonprofit called Livable Places. And part of what we wanted to do as a group was not to just be another brick and mortar developer that provided housing, but to have greater impact. And so we worked on policy issues as well as trying to do projects that were that would lead by example. And as we looked at some issues surrounding our city, one of the first things we did was looked at the blue line that goes from Long Beach to LA, and we found that along that, within a quarter mile of that transit corridor, there was almost zero housing built along that corridor. So we met with the city planner, the head planner, and showed her our report, and she said our information was all wrong. And we said, well, that's funny, it came from your department. And so we began to explain why we thought development wasn't happening along that corridor. And so we would start to receive proposed amendments to planning and zoning to review. And we got to the point where we wrote our own zoning amendments and proposed them to the city. Some of you probably know what's now called the small lot ordinance. Well, that was one that was started by Livable Places. It wound up with its own form that planning took, but that was initially what we proposed. We also did studies for bikeways that would make bikeways and walkways that would connect communities together. So we were very active in policy that would try and change Los Angeles. We also bought this building in Lincoln Heights. It was built in 1923 for Fuller Paints. It's a bit stretched out there. But we developed this project into 105 affordable and market rate housing units, mixed use. And our idea was to go into these communities and do model projects that would become the center for revitalization. This project is now built. It doesn't look like that, but it's a bit longer, but market rate on top, affordable in the bottom, and live, work, and retail on the ground level. Unfortunately, this was our last project for Livable Places. There was a time where we could sell that building without doing anything and make almost a $5 million profit. And by doing this as affordable housing, it basically put us out of business. So it's kind of sad. We had this vision that these projects would support our policy work with the developer fees, and that we would merge for-profit and nonprofits to make these model projects. But so far, we have not had that success with it. But that did not dissuade us. There's a new endeavor that I've undertaken. This is a new program which I co-founded with Enterprise Foundation, and it's called the Affordable Housing Design Leadership Institute. And we teach nonprofits and other developers how to make better city fabric buildings. And so our group invites, we send out an RFP to developers, redevelopment agencies, and other people, and we pay for them entirely to come to our institute with projects and with problems. And we had our last one in Minneapolis. Our next one is coming up in about a month in Cambridge. And what we do is we take these people and we put them with experts from all fields. Some of these people you probably know: developers, for-profit, nonprofit, Rose Fellows, bankers, architects, landscape architects, and we spend 2.5 days working on them with their projects. And so this team becomes a resource team forever to those buildings. And the hope is that this will spread and make buildings which historically are not very good community buildings, better buildings. I'm kind of figuring out you can get a lot more done when you get other people to do your work. And I was pleased that Enterprise Foundation embraced this so it didn't become another night job for me. But recently I've been looking, at another idea about making buildings, and I've become a bit fascinated with the idea of pattern making, and in some ways kind of a return to, a very basic principle, what we've learned in architecture school about composition and geometry. But I'm not so interested in this kind of geometry, this sort of mathematical pattern making. I'm more sort of interested in this idea of how you can stitch things together. And so I've been looking at different things like the markets in Mexico City, even this cheesy tourist stand in the Orlando airport, which, if you take any of those individual pieces, they're nothing special, but stitched together, they become quite beautiful. Like this, the quilts of the quilt makers at Gee's Bend in Southwest Alabama, who take these kind of, ordinary pieces and no design education, stitching them together into something, that it's so, I don't think I could make that as an educated designer. It's just extraordinary. So what I've started to do is actually, because it's hard for me to actually make in a building, to start painting and to try and take pieces, from my paintings and sort of reassemble them into other paintings in hopes of kind of making some sense or some patterns that can become architecture. And I think sort of where I'm going here is to try and make something of interest, but that can be fabricated by a repetitive means, or something that can be repeated over and over and over, so that the fabrication actually becomes economical. So, this is a project where I've taken a single pattern and actually laser or water jet cut these panels by layering them several deep, the exact same pattern, and then simply painting them a slightly different color. So you have the repetition, which becomes economical, but you get the variety and the kind of richness that, I think provides thermal protection. It becomes the sort of aesthetic component for the building, and also provides a function of providing privacy, shading, and those kind of things. So I've been looking more again at these kind of patterns. This is a takeoff and landing pattern of some airport, I don't really know what. And it's essentially three patterns, 2 takeoff, 1 landing. And it's the same described pattern to the pilot. But what I think makes this beautiful is the slight alteration of that pattern. And that's what gives it sort of the richness. So I've been looking at how can you take something that is repetitive and modify it in such a way where you don't take away the economies of the repetition, but achieve this kind of beauty. And this is a project we're working for, affordable housing project in New Orleans with Brad Pitt, where we're using pallet technology. So we're actually using the technology of making pallets to build the building, which then act as these shading devices for the building. They allow light to pass through. But the pallets then are kind of placed in such a way so that they provide richness to the building. a parking structure at UC San Diego where, inspired by the sort of prairie grasses there, we come up with a kit of parts that are pre-manufactured and can be, there's a strategy to kind of place them on the building so that the building becomes more than just a parking structure, but it becomes more of a fabric of the campus, but also, one that has visual interest. We also just finished this at Santa Monica Place, the garages there, where we made we completely remodeled the buildings, but by 2 single patterns with a slight modification to them. These were all pre-fabricated off-site and then brought in, hung on the building, and we added the retail on the ground. And so, the idea is that the building can become a better piece of city fabric than just a place to park the cars. The other thing too I've become quite interested in is the movement or the pattern and movements. And there's an artist named Patrick Hughes who does these paintings. Let's see if I can get this to work, called Prospectivity, where the paintings are fixed, but as you move by them, they appear to actually move. Oops.
My first perspective, but in reverse, was this shape here. The moment I put it on the wall, my reversal was reversed.
So, this is another project we finished using the idea of movement and merging it with the notion of making a single component for the entire building. And we work with a local manufacturer here, C.R. Lawrence, to make this one screen. And we got it to a point where it became economical to produce, and we repeated it over and over and over. Now, I was at some convention somewhere recently, and I saw that C.R. Lawrence now is peddling this as part of their product line. But you can see it's a kind of a simple shutter. And what happens is the occupants have total control over it. This is an east-west orientation, so you get, bad direct solar gain. So if one wanted to have that heat, they could. If one didn't, if one wanted the privacy, they could have the privacy. So, in a sense, it's the aesthetic part of the building, it's the thermal part of the building, and it's also a, functional part of the building. And that's the porch that's behind it. So, done in a sort of single screen. Things like this, like how you control light or looking at light, we've looked at ways to make these patterns as well. In this case, this is a small museum in St. Louis to actually modulate the light into the galleries. So those galleries that require more light, there's more openings. Those that require less, they become more solid. So you can create these interesting patterns, both spatially and formally, that act as functionally as well by looking at those patterns. This is a mentally disabled housing project again, where the screens on the south modulate the light into the courtyard. No roof, but the courtyard's in total shade. And a small museum we're just finished in North Carolina, where a very broad overhang has the roof that sort of feels like it's floating over your head. The last thing I'm going to show you is my own house. And what you see on the lower left is before we remodeled, or as I like to say, before we took the charm away from it. But both Angie and I grew up in Florida by these, great buildings done by Paul Rudolph and Victor Lundy and others. That one up there is called it's for Phil Hiss. It was built in 1953, called the Umbrella House. And what Rudolph did was he went to a local tomato farmer and he bought the tomato stakes from him to put on the top of the building, what he called the umbrella. And it shaded this modernist box, or as Sambo Mockbee would tell me, it's the shed that protects the hay, or you're protecting the goods. And it was just incredibly beautiful building, and this sort of inspired us when we remodeled our own home. So the part in orange is the existing 450 square foot house, and the part to the left is the part that we added. It's a through lot. We changed the orientation. It has 80 solar panels and all the things I discussed previously with the right orientation. This is what it looked like before. This is what it looks like now. And our utility bill is less than $500 a year. We try to make the building more air than building, so it's a series of horizontal and vertical lines that sort of float in space or float on the site. So it's very light on the land. This is the garden and the living space as you move around. How you enter the entry door, and that's the back of the front door, and that's the bathroom. It's very compact, so everything is stitched together. Space, everything's naturally lit. The stair is perforated so the heat rises through it, exhausts out of the building. And our master bedroom. This was by my old office in Santa Monica, and for a long time the Santa Monica Museum back there would roll the solar panel out of their building every day. Now, I had no idea what it was for or what they did, but they'd roll this thing out every single day. It must have been doing something. But you see this kind of thing everywhere. This is a solar camel delivering refrigerated vaccines. And, we're really good about this thing on a small scale. Where we're not so good on it is at institutions such as this, where the buildings are owned in perpetuity, but there's always an excuse why it doesn't pay back to make our buildings more efficient. So I'm going to leave you with something that Lewis Mumford wrote almost 50 years ago, when he said in an essay on architecture and civilization, "Our architectural development is bound up with the course of our civilization. To the extent that we permit our institutions and organizations to function blindly as our bed is made, so must we lie on it. The future of our civilization depends upon our ability to select and control our heritage from the past, to alter our present attitudes and habits, and to project fresh forms into which our energies may be freely poured." Thank you very much.
Thank you. Fantastic. Do we have any questions?
Why aren't there more people at the lecture here? Totally world-class architect. Something has to be done.
Good question.
That's my son, so he's going to make a lot of noise.
I have a question. Was he dizzy?
What's that?
Was he dizzy after that? Was called her dizzy.
Oh, after that, yeah.
How much did you pay for doing it?
At that point, everything's free.
I have a couple of, first comment, just what you finished with was very interesting. Why does an institution like USC not have more photovoltaics, for example? We went through a process of getting Kanika Photovoltaics to offer to give us photovoltaics if we would just test them. And then we found, once we got through the process, that we were not allowed to install them because the University of Southern California has a contract with the Department of Water and Power. And they buy energy at a certain rate, but specifically are forbidden to generate any of their own.
Right, well.
So, I mean, in a way, your question was rhetorical, but I'm giving you a specific answer.
Well, we've had our battles with the state, and we've actually fought the state on, where we've had our, Congress people also fight on our behalf. Energy policy hasn't changed since the days where we were developing infrastructure. So it's very favorable towards utility companies, and they make a lot of money, so they don't want it changed. So.
And sometimes the utility, the money goes to the municipality. And so there's sort of a vested interest that actually impedes the application. I mean, I think we're on the same side. Other questions?
Just one question about the idea of ordinary and extraordinary. I think that's a very important point, how it allows you the ability to take on projects knowing that within the parameters and strict kind of framework of these projects, you know you can find something and push it. And I think maybe you could talk a little more about that process with you guys.
Yeah, we try to look right in front of our face instead of beyond. I think a lot of times our tendency is to reach beyond to try to find something new when something new is already right in front of you. And so we try to look first in front of our face to see if we can see things in a different way maybe, or something that's already there which has not been seen that way. So we try in some ways not to invent things, but to just reveal a story that already exists, something that's already embedded.
Do you find through the organization of the nonprofit situations, do you find the challenge or the operation through that has the potential to reorganize your practice in a way that would not venture into otherwise, or actually providing rather traditional platform where your practice actually rely on? In which way that you at least you expect or
I mean, I think it could be that way, and there are others who have done that, guys like, there's a whole host of things, like the U.S. Green Building Council started with, a person, public architecture, there are a whole host of them, and the people involved in them who have founded them have gone on to sort of make that their career. I guess I'm sort of less interested in doing that. I'm sort of, I guess, more interested in leaving something out there that can be developed. And, Charles Eames said that ideas are not owned by anyone. They exist in the world for people to sort of snatch up and work upon. And, he goes on to describe that you have to treat ideas with the utmost care, because if you ruin them for everyone. And so I like to think that we kind of are leaving seeds around for other people to build upon, and that we can have many seeds that, sort of multiply and have a greater good. And I think it's sort of my nature. I get bored really quickly, once I've done something, I'm ready to do something else. And I guess that's also in my practice, like Angie always tells me, can't we just do one thing twice? Do we have to always do it different every time? But I guess I don't know how to answer that. That's just in my nature, my DNA, I guess.
This LA-ness, have you find it also a limitation in the pursuits that you have injected in your practice?
Big time.
Can you address that? And
I'm not even from LA. That's the sort of irony, but I think I'm not the only one who suffers that. I think it's unique to people in California, not just architects, but in the art world. We're kind of seen as like outsiders, not, and so we're the sort of odd people that, they do odd stuff. And, like Tom Main has even told me, he said, if you're going to do work around the country, you got to go through Europe, or some other place before they'll take anyone from California seriously, or until you reach a status to where, you become a commodity like Frank Gehry, but it is hard. It's a constant struggle for us. We, are interviewing for projects all around, but we seem to always be second place. And, it's frustrating. So eventually maybe that will change, but yeah, I think it's not unique to us, but I think it's unique to especially Southern California. And I hear it time and time again, you can do that there, but you can't do it here. It doesn't work here. Well, I'm like, just give me a chance, That's all I ask for.
Well, your amazing work is totally a winner. I have a question on the. It was interesting that you had this project that you developed. I was unaware of that, and then you said.
I'm glad you saw something new.
I saw a lot of things. I was really amazed at it. But then it sounded like it had some. Was it just the economy, the timing that hurt the project? And do you think architects should become developers?
Yeah, I think we're perfectly suited for it. We are the best ones. In fact, in my class, what we're going to do is, we're asking them to program the project. And we try to do that with all our projects to give back more than's asked for of us. And I think because we're best at doing it, the only piece we're not really good at is the financial part. And if we have that, we have everything. And so I think it is the model. I think we're way smarter than we give ourselves credit for. But we have this, there's a lot of baggage that comes with. I also think we need a sort of paradigm shift in how we educate architecture students too. More collaboration, more working together, more diversity in what you can do or what's acceptable to do to be a good architect. I mean, we went to school at a time when you had to be the designer. And if you were a failure as a designer, you were a failure as an architect. And I don't think that exists today. And I think we need to be better at kind of filling the field and working as teams, and so I think there's great potential in that if we can sort of seize the opportunity. Part of why I sort of show this too is like, the young people out there, if there's one person who takes it on and does it, you have more impact than any single building I'll ever do. Yes, Calder.
Why'd you put a video of me in there?
Because it was funny. Yes.
Do you find it difficult to take on multiple roles? Just as an architect and a real estate developer and working on nonprofits, does it ever get overwhelming?
that, yeah, so, it's extra jobs. But again, like when we founded the Livable Places, that was probably more than a second job for us. We were always working at it. And when I came up with the idea for the Design Leadership Institute, it was in the back of my mind that it would be, another job again. And I talked to, some friends like Katie Swenson. I know Patrick knows Katie, and Patrick's involved this time around with our institute, as I recall. Isn't that right? You're not sure yet? But, I talked to her about this. Well, first I, talked to Maurice Cox, who was the design director at the NEA. He was the one who encouraged me to write a grant proposal, which, we received a grant from the NEA to form it. And Katie Swenson, I enlisted her, or I ran the idea by her, and she said to me, this is something Enterprise, I think, would be really interested in. Do you mind if I talk to my bosses at Enterprise? I said, no, that's fine. Well, they came back and totally embraced the whole idea. So I, in some ways, said to them, they're a great organization. I said, why don't you guys take this over? Why don't you make it part of Enterprise, and you guys run it, and I'll be your advisor, and I'll help you organize the resource teams, and I'll help you, get people this and that. So for me, that was kind of a relief, because it went from, a 40-hour-a-week job to something much less than that. So it takes time, but if you're anything that is deep inside, it's worth doing.
Well, thank you all for your participation.
Okay, that's my last question. Sustainability is often talked about, I would say, in terms of sort of like the technological side or some of the passive things. I think that you discussed in your lecture, and maybe if you could, I'll say, briefly talk about, I guess, or maybe opinions are one word, but how you sort of feel that intersection happens in your own work, like the technology versus the more passive aspect.
I think it should just be a code. I never heard anyone ever say, isn't my building great? It's ADA accessible. It just is. So, and I think there's way too much made about the whole sustainability thing. It should just be, a code. We should just all have to comply with it and end the story. It's just, it's not a heroic thing. I think it just should be. That's it.
Oh,